Today, we're breaking down the Trump administration's perspective on its conflict with Iran. We're basing this explainer directly on statements from the White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, to give us a direct look into their official case. This quote right here from the press secretary, it really sets the stage. This is the central claim that frames the administration's entire argument, that this action is not only necessary, but frankly, long overdue. So just to be super clear, our goal here isn't to take sides. It's simply to outline their position, using their own words and their own data, so we can all understand how they're presenting the situation to the public. Okay, let's dive into it. First up, the military case. And right out of the gate, the administration's assessment of the operation, which is just 2 weeks in, is, well, it's overwhelmingly positive. According to the press secretary, the White House has been working around the clock to communicate what they're calling a tremendous success. They're arguing that the Iranian regime has been, and this is their word, gutted. And to back that up, they're pointing to some pretty specific metrics. The first key figure is 90%. According to the White House, that's the reduction in ballistic missile attacks coming out of Iran since the operation started. And they follow that one with another really striking number, 95%. This, they claim, is the reduction in Iran's drone capabilities, another major objective of the military action. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale of the operation, as the White House describes it, it's significant. They're reporting they've hit 65 of Iran's naval ships and, get this, over 6,000 targets across the country. They're really using these numbers to emphasize how comprehensive the mission is. Okay, so that's the picture they're painting overseas. But what about here in the U.S.? Let's switch gears and look at their stated efforts to handle security threats on the home front. The press secretary frames domestic security as the president's #1 job, his absolute top priority. She describes this whole process of constant monitoring and really tight coordination between the national security team and all the various intelligence agencies. And to make that happen, she outlines a few specific actions. We're talking about increasing cooperation between federal and local law enforcement, launching nationwide task forces to share intel faster, and a constant 24/7 effort to stop potential lone wolf attacks. She also made a point to mention a call for Congress to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security. All right, next up is something that's always crucial in a conflict: controlling the narrative. Let's dig into the information case. You know, a huge piece of the White House's message is that some of the reports you might be seeing in the media are creating a totally misleading picture. The press secretary went so far as to say that what you might be reading is, and I quote, quite the opposite of what's actually happening on the ground. Now, what's really interesting here is that they're not just vaguely complaining, they're detailing their direct pushback. The press secretary pointed to a CNN story they called unequivocally false and said it led to a correction after a phone call. They also mentioned forcing a correction from ABC News for using what they called unverified intelligence. And they criticized the New York Times for, in their view, incorrectly implying that the U.S. is losing. Of course, any conflict in this part of the world is going to have an economic impact. So next up is the economic case, and it focuses squarely on the price we're all paying at the pump. So the administration is being very direct about this. They acknowledge that, yes, Americans are seeing a temporary spike in gas prices. So the obvious question becomes, what is their plan to deal with it? Well, according to the press secretary, they have a three-pronged approach. First, they're providing political risk insurance for oil tankers going through the region. Second, they have the U.S. Navy ready to escort those ships if things get dicey. And third, they're ready to responsibly release oil from the country's Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help stabilize those prices. So, when you put all these pieces together, the military action, the domestic security, the media pushback, it all builds to their ultimate justification for the whole operation, the big picture goal. And at its core, the administration's argument is really a trade-off. They're framing the temporary disruption in oil prices as a necessary short-term pain. Why? Because it's required to achieve what they see as a critical long-term gain, a world that's safer because it's free from the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. And this quote brings us to the absolute heart of it, as stated directly by the press secretary. The mission, she says, is about eradicating this threat of Iran building a nuclear bomb to threaten the world. This is presented as the fundamental reason for the entire conflict. And that brings us to our final question. The entire White House case is built on this idea that immediate costs, both economic and military, are justified by future security. And that leaves all of us to consider, by what metrics, in the months and years to come, will the success of that strategy truly be measured?